Cultural appropriation is something that the Indigenous community is dealing with constantly at the moment. It seems to be a never-ending stream of misuse and appropriation and misrepresentation of our culture.
We're very much positioned as something that can be extracted or taken within this settler colonial system. Our artistic practices and our cultural practices are also sort of seen as being there for the taking.
Our art comes from the land and goes back to it. Now, if you have an overblown sense of entitlement, think everything belongs to you, then you're going to be taught to exploit what belongs to you as opposed to let the land teach you.
For many years or decades, centuries, people, researchers, anthropologists, ethnographists went into Aboriginal communities and took. They took the knowledge, they took the objects, they took the ideas, they took the medicine, they took everything, and then they left. We're faced with institutions that are very powerful and that are so convinced that they're right all the time. And they're so convinced, using the logic of the Western art world, that they're on the top of the pyramid and that their knowledge is universal.
It constantly comes up in fashion or clothing or even in media where something looks cool, like a headdress, and without any context or understanding of why that is important.
It is critical in the process to address protocols. And why it's critical is because we have endured so much appropriation, and with that appropriation and misrepresentation over the years, and particularly through the arts and cultural institutions. Ultimately, for one not to engage in that process, the worst case scenario is you're actively contributing to the degradation of a people and a cultures of this land.
Protocols are not static things. They're not things of the past either. I think they're profoundly rooted in Indigenous knowledge. They're profoundly rooted in the understanding of what the world is.
That knowledge is critical to maintaining our distinction and maintaining our nationhood.
As Indigenous peoples, we have across Turtle Island, we all have protocols that we have always engaged in nation to nation.
I often go back to the Guswanta, the Turo Wampum, which is a moral code of how we should conduct ourselves.
For me, protocols are about presence and reverence, because I think they carry the depth of the meaning behind protocols.
If you do want to explore things, that aren't your own, that don't come from yourself, that listening is the most important thing. That you find somebody who can teach you how to respect and how to do things right.
There can be a very strong disconnect between what the artist wants to do and really kind of what is the right thing to do. And sometimes people feel that might be an issue of censorship. Sometimes that people might feel it's a non-artistic infringement onto their artistic process. And I do think it's a different time. I think we're in a time right now where we actually need to be proactive.
It's important definitely to have some guidelines in place, because there's a very fine line between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. So it's just a good idea to know where that line's drawn.
So much of it comes back to acknowledgement. So it's acknowledgement that there's a way to approach this type of work, even if there isn't a right way or a singular way.
Because if you want to engage with Indigenous communities, then I think that you have to work on their terms. And I think that you have to be guided by Indigenous principles in doing that work. So principles of respect, principles of relevance, of responsibility, of relationality, and then reciprocity. Respecting
protocols is a way of learning how to respect everything around you, not just culture, but everything. If you have respect to treat somebody's culture and somebody's song, somebody's dance, or anything with a reverence, then you're going to look at the rest of the world like that too.
And so if you don't have relationships with elders and storytellers and Indigenous communities, then I don't know how you can ethically tell Indigenous stories. Before you ask for a contribution, that they understand how that contribution is going to be used, and you have their permission and their consent to do so.
We go in communities to bring something and then to take. It cannot just be a one-way street. It has to be that you are receiving something, but you're bringing something. And at the end of the day, the community has benefited from what you've been doing. Not just you, not just your career, not just your show, not just your artwork.
And a lot of times I think in the Academy and the Arts, our practice of reciprocity is not balanced. So we'll maybe give something back to the elder, but it's not in proportion to what the elder gave us. And so I think now a lot about proportionality.
And as a curator in my practice, I use protocols as a way of first taking care of the people. I see it as my responsibility in my curatorial work to first take care of the people. I use it also as a way of taking care of the space. And finally, it's a way also of taking care of the ideas that we're exploring.
Indigenous cultural protocols play a big part in our work. It was one of the first questions we had to ask ourselves in A Tribe Called Red when we decided to start remixing powwow music. Was what does this mean? What does it entail as far as getting permission for these songs? There's a huge responsibility that comes with being connected to those things. That's something that we had to address for ourselves right away. It's like if we're going to use our culture in our music, in our art form, and essentially as what we're going to show the world, that our responsibility to our community and to the greater Indigenous community was massive.
I think it's important that the idea of protocols and the practice of protocols don't become rigid and a measurement of how we conduct ourselves. I think it's a more organic form of knowledge that surfaces, and we have to be relatively sincere on how we are respectful.
I always want to caution people that make sure you're not oppressing others with the protocols. They're there to include people, not to keep each other out.
To me, protocols are an ongoing ethical process.
I think by moving forward with mutual understanding and relationships, protocols, traditional knowledge, and our contemporary practices will benefit everyone in many ways because it gives a distinct identity within the nation. It's a form of nation building within our own nations and within a larger collective of indigeneity across a global stage.
Indigenous people, they want to share what they have. So if you ask questions and you have a willingness to learn, they will understand that and they'll want to share with you their culture.